Today, I want to talk about something that might make some people uncomfortable. And honestly, I'm not very comfortable talking about it either. Because I don't talk about religion here. And I don't really talk about it much in life either. But something happened to me that changed the way I look at organized religion. And I've never talked about it on this channel before. So before I go any further, there's one thing you need to know. I'm still a believer, but I don't talk to people about what I believe, and I don't try to convince anybody of anything, and I'm never going to use this channel to lead somebody toward or away from anything. That's your choice, not mine. But I haven't stepped foot in a church in a few years, and I don't intend to ever again. What changed wasn't what I believe. What changed was who I trusted to tell me what I was supposed to believe. And since starting this channel, I've realized my experience isn't nearly as unusual as I once thought. I see versions of it in the comments all the time. People who believed that they belonged to a community that preached love, compassion, and helping one another until they became the person who needed the compassion. And I know that feeling. You know, I've talked before about, what was happening inside of my marriage. So I'm not going to retell that story. It's all here. But when I finally reached the point where I was struggling with whether I needed to leave, I went privately to the church leader, a man of the cloth. Somebody you're supposed to be able to trust with things you can't, well, things that you aren't comfortable telling anyone else. And I told him what was happening. His answer? I needed to go back and fix my marriage because I was the man. It was my responsibility. And then came something I found even more ridiculous. Women are supposed to be subservient to men. Boy. And I'm sitting there thinking, what in the hell does that have to do with what's actually happening inside my own home? This marriage was quite literally killing me. And instead of trying to understand what was actually happening, I was being told what role, or what my role was supposed to be. Go back, fix it, be the man. But then something happened that damaged my trust even more. People started talking. People knew things about my marriage and my personal life that I had never discussed with any of them. Not one of them. I discussed those things privately with that church leader. And somehow, people I'd never spoken to about my marriage knew things about my personal life. Now, you tell me how that happens. Because I damn sure didn't tell them. You know, that's when I really started pulling away. I stopped going regularly. I wasn't happy with what I was seeing anymore. And eventually, I created quite a bit of different distance between myself and that church. I thought that was pretty much the end of it, but it wasn't. Then Hurricane Helene came through, and it absolutely laid waste to my community. Trees everywhere, roads blocked, homes damaged, power gone, internet gone. Even the cell phones didn't work. We were basically cut off from the rest of the world for almost 2 weeks. And I wasn't sitting comfortably at home watching everybody else struggle. I was right in the middle of it. I had trees on my own trucks. You know, in I had a tree on my house. It took me 2 days just to get myself out. But there was something about me that suddenly became pretty important. I owned a tree service. I had the equipment, I had the saws, I had the experience. And since there was no cell service, nobody could exactly pick up a phone and call me. So, church leaders started showing up at my home. They told me how badly people needed me. Most of those people were related to them or were in that church. And that I had turned my back on them. That I was being selfish. And then I was told that I needed to get right with the Lord. And that one really got under my skin. Because I remember thinking, did he say that? Or are you using him for your own selfish gain? You need something from me. You need my equipment. You need my experience. You need the guy who owns the tree service. And now you're standing at my home telling me what God wants me to do? How convenient. And that's when my mind went right back to that private conversation about my marriage. Because this was the same man of the cloth that I'd gone to when I was struggling with whether to leave my marriage or to leave a marriage that was quite literally killing me. And what did he tell me? Go back. Fix it. I'm the man. It's my responsibility. And women are supposed to be subservient to men. So now I've got another question. Did God tell him that too? Or was that yet again his own bias being handed to me as though it came from some higher power? Because that's where I developed a problem that I haven't been able to get past. If you're going to tell me what God wants from me, I damn sure or better be able to tell the difference between his will and yours. And I couldn't anymore. When my marriage was falling apart, God's will supposedly looked exactly like what this man thought I should do. Then after a hurricane, when they desperately needed someone with my equipment and skills, God's will somehow looked exactly like what they needed me to do. That's one hell of a coincidence. And that changed something in me. Not my belief. You can't shake that. But my trust in the institution. And over the years, I've realized I don't think this behavior is limited to churches. Church happened to be where I learned that lesson. But put enough people together, and eventually the group seems to develop interests of its own. Kind of like an HOA. Think about it. An HOA starts with a pretty reasonable idea. Everybody works together to protect the neighborhood and keep it a nice place to live. Give it enough time, though, and somebody's measuring your grass with a ruler and sending you a letter because your garbage can stayed outside too long. I'm joking, but am I really? Somewhere along the way, protecting the neighborhood can turn into protecting the authority of the HOA. And I think all groups can do the same thing. They start with a purpose, then they develop rules, then expectations, and then authority. And somewhere along the way, protecting the institution can become more important than protecting the people it supposedly exists to serve. That's what I started questioning after my experience. Because here's the part that really stuck with me. I'd helped people in that community church many, many times before. When there were storms or other unfortunate situations and somebody needed tree work, there were plenty of times I helped. This is, after all, South Georgia. We're no stranger to just utter destruction. For free, my equipment, my fuel, my labor, my time, my insurance, my manpower, who I have to pay. Nobody forced me to do any of that. I chose to. and I don't regret it. If somebody genuinely needs help and I'm capable of helping them, I still want to be that guy. But after everything that happened, I had to ask myself something that I never really considered before. Did that community value me? Or did it, value what I could do for it? Because those two things can look exactly the same until you stop being useful. And I think a much that's much bigger than my experience with a church. Being needed can feel an awful lot like being valued, and it can even feel like being loved. And you may go years without realizing that there's a difference until you finally say no, or I can't, or I need to take care of myself this time. And I've learned what happens next, can tell you an awful lot. That's why when I see people in these comments describing their own experiences with institutions that supposedly exist to help them, I pay attention because I recognize that disappointment. I don't think the answer is for me to tell anybody else what they should believe or, where they should go. I'm not doing that. I'm telling you what happened to me and what I took away from it. I don't care nearly as much anymore about what an institution tells me it stands for. Don't tell me you care about people. Show me. Don't tell me you're compassionate. Show me what happens when compassion actually becomes inconvenient. Don't tell me everybody matters. Show me how you treat the person who suddenly can't offer you anything in return. Because anybody can live by their principles when those principles cost them nothing. I want to see what happens when those principles become inconvenient. That's where I think you find out what somebody actually stands for. And maybe that's why this experience stayed with me all these years. It didn't change what I believe, it changed who I'm willing to trust with it. Because I don't need another human being telling me what God supposedly wants from me, when somehow God always seems to want exactly what that person wanted from me in the first place. So these days, I pay a lot less attention to what people say they stand for, and I watch what they do when standing for it becomes inconvenient. Y'all, that's my 2 cents for the day, and I'll see y'all in the next one.